I'm Penny Howard, 38 years old, a pediatric nurse, and the mother of a bright, curious 9-year-old girl named Claire. Every morning before dawn, I'm up, checking my watch, packing Claire's lunch, and making sure her backpack is zipped tight with her favorite books, a little notebook, and her well-worn teddy bear. The smell of freshly brewed coffee fills the kitchen while I run through the day's mental checklist. It's a delicate balancing act, juggling the demands of a career where every second counts and the tender needs of a growing child who still needs her mother's steady presence. Working in pediatric nursing has shaped me in ways I never anticipated. The hospital can be a place of hope, but also heartbreak. I've held the hands of frightened children, soothed their tears, and fought alongside them and their families to see another sunrise. Those moments remind me daily why I chose this path, to be a steady source of comfort when the world feels uncertain. But when I come home, the challenges shift. My daughter Claire needs me in a different way. Her laughter, her scraped knees, her endless questions about the world, and I want to be there fully, even when exhaustion tugs at my bones after a long shift. Yet, as grounded as I try to keep my world at home, the weight of my family's complicated dynamics often creeps in like a shadow. Despite my efforts to maintain peace with my parents and my younger brother Mark, family gatherings have never been easy. There's always an undercurrent of tension beneath the polite smiles and forced civility. I'm often the one trying to smooth over cracks, mediating disagreements that no one else wants to face. On the surface, we appear like any other family, sharing meals, exchanging holiday gifts, celebrating milestones. But behind closed doors, I feel sidelined, as if I'm a guest in my own family's story rather than a central part of it. My parents, Robert and Elaine, have their own way of navigating relationships, often cold, distant, and dismissive. Mark, with his charm and effortless ease, sails through these interactions like the favored son, the golden child everyone seems to dote on. Meanwhile, I'm left trying to prove my worth, to earn their approval, even as I'm pushed to the margins. I've learned to speak softly, to avoid rocking the boat, but that doesn't erase the ache of feeling invisible or undervalued. I carry the emotional weight of their expectations and frustrations, often absorbing blame silently, all while trying to shield Claire from the undercurrents swirling around us. Recently, a family trip that was supposed to be a warm reunion at Grandma's place turned into something much darker. Claire, just 9 years old, was left alone, abandoned at the train station, while the rest of the family boarded the train without her. I first learned of this through the family group chat, a digital space that has become a battleground of thinly veiled cruelty and passive aggression. The message was chilling. "Come get her. We're departing now." It was signed off by my father, Robert, in a tone so cold and detached that it sent a shiver down my spine. Then my mother added with an icy finality, "Don't make us feel guilty. It's a lesson." I stared at my phone, heart pounding, disbelief crashing over me like a wave. How could they do this to Claire? To me? The place where my daughter was left, this bustling train station, should have been a place of arrival and reunion, not abandonment and fear. My hands trembled as I grabbed my keys and heart raced faster than my feet could carry me. I drove to the station utterly terrified, the familiar streets blurring past as my mind spun through every possible nightmare. That moment was a fracture in my family's fragile facade, an exposure of something raw and painful beneath years of forced smiles and silent compromises. It was the moment I realized that the harmony I'd fought so hard to maintain was nothing more than a fragile illusion. The incident didn't just reveal their cruelty, it shattered my hope that family could be a source of comfort and safety for Claire and me. Instead, it marked the start of a reckoning I hadn't anticipated, a confrontation with the very real fractures running through the people I was supposed to trust most. The cruelty didn't appear overnight. It was more like a slow, persistent erosion that wore away at my sense of belonging from the very beginning. Growing up, I was always cast in the role of the responsible one, the dutiful daughter who tried to keep the peace, who quietly picked up the pieces when things fell apart. But somehow, being responsible wasn't the same as being loved or valued. I was the outsider in my own family, a quiet shadow that never quite fit into the picture my parents seemed so eager to paint. My brother Mark, on the other hand, was the golden child. From the moment he was old enough to talk, he was showered with attention and praise. Every accomplishment of his was celebrated with almost theatrical enthusiasm. Mark got straight A's. Mark made the soccer team. Mark was the favorite grandchild. My parents structured their world around him, and their favoritism was as obvious as the sun in the sky. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't accidental. It was a calculated, unspoken hierarchy, and I was always beneath the surface, out of sight. Their dismissive behavior toward me came in many forms. When I got good grades, it was expected, a baseline, a given, not something to be celebrated. When I tried to share my successes, the response was often a distracted nod, or a polite but perfunctory, "That's nice, Penny." In contrast, when Mark spoke, the room lit up. I remember one evening in particular, sitting at the dinner table during a family gathering. Mark was regaling everyone with tales of his latest promotion at work, his voice confident and brimming with charm. My parents hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes, openly proud. When I attempted to join the conversation later, with news about a nursing scholarship I had earned, my words barely registered. My mother shifted her eyes and gave a quick, dismissive wave. "That's all fine, dear," she said. "But Mark's news is more exciting." Those words stung more than she could have known. It wasn't just the dismissals. It was the way my failures, or what they perceived as failures, were magnified and held against me. I was the sensitive one, the daughter who needed to toughen up. When I made mistakes, the blame landed squarely on my shoulders, often in front of others. I learned to absorb criticism silently, not because I wanted to, but because it felt safer to stay quiet than to risk more conflict. And yet, no matter how much I did, it was never enough. I was the family's emotional dumping ground, the one who took the heat so everyone else could remain comfortable. I tried to rationalize their behavior for years. Maybe this was their way of toughening me up for the real world, I thought. Maybe they were preparing me for the hardships life would throw my way. That explanation gave me a fragile thread of hope that beneath these cold interactions, there was some twisted form of love, some method to the cruelty. But the deeper I tried to find that meaning, the more the wounds grew. Every exclusion from family plans, every overlooked achievement, every moment when my feelings were dismissed chipped away at my confidence. I started to feel like I was invisible, a ghost in the family album. In stark contrast, Mark seemed to float through life on a cushion of unconditional approval. His mistakes were forgiven, his shortcomings excused as quirks or just youthful missteps. The difference in treatment was glaring and painful, a constant reminder that I was not the favored child, not the one who deserved the warm smiles or the protective embrace. This dynamic set the tone for all our family interactions, poisoning what should have been a source of strength and love. Even now, I can recall the bittersweet moments when I watched Mark bask in the spotlight, while I clung to the edges, trying desperately to find my place. I remember the nights lying awake, wondering when, if ever, I would be enough in their eyes. The ache of being sidelined erupted quietly inside me, and I carried it into adulthood, unknowingly passing the weight to Claire through the patterns I struggled to break. Looking back, I see how these early experiences shaped not only my relationships with my family, but also how fiercely I protected Claire from similar neglect. I wanted to rewrite the script, to give her the warmth and acceptance I had been denied. But the undercurrent of favoritism and exclusion was woven so deeply into my family's fabric that it was impossible to ignore the shadows it cast. The cruelty was never just about me. It was about the message they sent to us both, that we were not truly welcome, not truly loved, not truly family in the way that mattered. And so, the roots of this cruelty reach far back, tangled in years of dismissals, comparisons, and emotional coldness that left scars beneath the surface. It explains why, when the train station incident happened, it wasn't a shocking anomaly, but rather the latest and most painful chapter in a long history of being pushed aside. The fractures were already there, and this was the moment they cracked wide open. I've sacrificed plenty over the years, more than I ever imagined I would, and certainly more than anyone in my family ever acknowledged. When I was offered a promotion at the hospital, a chance to step into a leadership role I'd worked tirelessly for, I didn't hesitate to decline it. The reason wasn't the job itself, but the reality waiting for me at home. My aging grandparents needed care, and I was the one they turned to. My parents, Robert and Elaine, were quick to remind me how family comes first, and so I rearranged my life, shifting my schedule, often working double shifts to make up for time I spent helping them. The quiet assumption was that I would always be the one to step in, the dependable daughter who never said no. Covering family bills became another invisible burden I bore. Between utilities, car repairs, and unexpected expenses cropping up for the household where my parents and Mark still lived, I found myself quietly footing the costs. I never kept track or brought it up. Why would I? It was just what was expected of me. When Mark had a financial hiccup, whether it was a forgotten bill or a sudden expense for his new apartment, I was there to pick up the slack. Not once did I hear a thank you. Instead, I was met with silence or a nod of, "Thanks, Penny. You're a lifesaver." It stings in hindsight, how often I was taken for granted, treated like a resource rather than a person. Mark, my younger brother, had a way of skating through life without ever facing the consequences his actions warranted. If he promised to help with a family event or show up for a gathering, I could almost guarantee he'd disappear when the time came. And who ended up running the last-minute errands or smoothing over disappointed relatives? Me. When he forgot to bring a birthday gift or didn't call Grandma on her birthday, again, I was the one who made the calls, sent the flowers, cleaned up his messes. It was exhausting. But I silently swallowed my frustration because keeping the peace felt more important than confrontation. I've coordinated every holiday for as long as I can remember. Booking venues, ordering food, organizing travel logistics, and making sure Claire was cared for amidst the chaos. It became a Sisyphean task, dragging me deeper into a role I never chose but couldn't escape. I was the glue holding us together, the fixer, the planner, the one who ensured everything looked perfect on the outside, even if the cracks underneath were widening. There were times I wanted to scream, to tell them all how unfair it was, but I held my tongue. My mother's piercing gaze and father's cold dismissal taught me quickly that speaking up only made things worse. Driving Claire to her countless activities, dance lessons, school plays, doctor's appointments, became my world outside the hospital walls. Jason, my husband, does his best to share the load, but even he feels powerless when the family drama spills over. He's seen me break down in tears after yet another family slight, and he's worried about the toll it's taking on me. I want to shield Claire from this storm, to protect her innocence and joy, but sometimes the weight seeps through. It's a constant battle to be both the nurturing mother and the weary daughter, caught in the crossfire of unmet expectations and silent demands. I've lent money without question, without expectation of repayment, because I believed that family means support, even if it was one-sided. I remember slipping cash into my mother's purse once when she said something about being a bit short this month, and seeing Mark's eyes light up when he got a new jacket I bought for him because he needed it. But none of this ever earned me a genuine thanks or recognition. It was invisible labor, the kind no one mentions but everyone expects. Despite all these sacrifices, despite the invisible labor and emotional toll, I held on to hope. Hope that one day my family would see me, not just as the responsible daughter or the backup plan, but as a person worthy of respect and love. I convinced myself that if I kept giving, kept stepping in, kept smoothing over the cracks, things would change. Maybe at the next reunion, they'd acknowledge my nursing career, or at the next holiday, they'd ask how Claire was doing with genuine interest. Maybe Mark would stop being the golden child and start seeing me as an equal. Maybe my parents would finally appreciate the woman I'd become. But every small moment of hope was met with cold reality. The family continued to take my sacrifices for granted. They treated my contributions as obligations, never as gifts. The more I gave, the more invisible I became. It was like trying to fill a bottomless pit, pouring my heart into a family that only saw me as a tool to be used, a caretaker to be exploited, and an emotional punching bag to be ignored. Still, I kept going. For Claire, for the belief that family means something more than duty and cold calculation. I nurtured her bright spirit, making sure she saw the best in people even when the adults around us failed. But deep down, the cracks in my own heart grew wider with every passing day, and I wondered how much longer I could keep pretending everything was okay. The seeds of doubt had already taken root. The question wasn't if the family would hurt us, but when they would, and how badly. That summer reunion was supposed to be a joyful occasion, a chance for the family to come together beneath the warm glow of the late afternoon sun, to share stories and laughter, and for Claire to play with her cousins in Grandma's sprawling backyard. I had spent days preparing, baking pies, packing little snacks for Claire, and smoothing out the worn edges of old family traditions, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. But as soon as we arrived, the familiar undercurrent of tension settled over me like a heavy fog. Mark, my younger brother, had already taken center stage before we even stepped through the door. His booming voice carried across the room as he recounted the family-funded vacation he'd just returned from, an extravagant trip that I knew had been meticulously funded by my parents. He spoke with that effortless charm he always wielded, painting pictures of pristine beaches, luxury hotels, and endless indulgence, the way people hung on to his every word, laughing at his jokes, nodding in admiration, made my stomach twist with a mix of envy and resignation. It was as though his life was a highlight reel, while mine played in the shadows. When it was finally my turn to speak about my nursing career, the response was starkly different. I tried to share a recent milestone, how I had been commended for my dedication during a particularly tough pediatric case at the hospital, but my words barely registered. Mark cut through the conversation with a scoff, loud enough for a group nearby to hear. "Penny's job is just a job," he said, his tone dripping with dismissal. "Nothing glamorous about it. It's not like she's out there making real money or doing something important." I froze for a moment, the sting sharper than I expected. "It's about helping children and their families at their most vulnerable," I replied quietly, trying to hold back the tremor in my voice. But before I could say more, my mother rolled her eyes, her lips curling into that familiar thin line she reserved for times when I spoke out of turn. "Oh, Penny, don't be so sensitive," Elaine said with a patronizing smile. "We're just having a little fun here. Mark's stories are what everyone wants to hear." Her words were casual, but they cut through me like ice. The room tittered with polite laughter, and I could see some relatives exchanging glances, some sympathetic, others indifferent. I swallowed hard, forcing a tight smile, but inside, my heart ached. I felt like a child being scolded for wanting to join the grown-ups' conversation. Claire stood beside me, her small hand clutching mine tightly. I glanced down at her wide eyes, confused by the sudden coldness in the air. Sensing her unease amid the adults' shifting moods, my mind raced. How could I explain this to her? That sometimes even family doesn't behave like it should? I wanted to pull her close, to shield her from the invisible barbs that flew around us, but I was caught in the same whirlwind of exclusion. The rest of the evening played out in a blur of half-hearted attempts to engage, and the weight of being sidelined. Whenever I tried to steer the conversation toward something meaningful, Claire's latest school play, my recent nursing training, my mother or Mark would interrupt, redirecting attention back to their preferred narratives. It was as if my voice was a whisper against a chorus that refused to listen. I caught my father's eyes for a brief moment across the room. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of impatience, a silent reminder that I was expected to fit neatly into the background. The family's hierarchy was clear and unyielding, and I was not the favored player. Later, as we sat around the table eating the meal my mother had prepared, Mark launched into another tirade about the lavish spending on his vacation, boasting about the first-class tickets and the fancy dinners paid for by our parents. The room responded with nods and oohs, while I quietly stirred my food, the bitter taste matching my mood. I remembered catching Claire's eyes again, her face shadowed with confusion. She didn't understand why our family seemed so fractured, why her uncle's words stung and her grandmother's gaze felt cold. I wanted to tell her that none of this was her fault, that she was loved deeply by me, even if the rest of the family couldn't always show it. That day planted a seed of doubt so profound it began to take root in my heart. The unsettling realization that no matter how hard I tried, how much I sacrificed, the family might never truly see me or treat me with the respect I deserved. More painfully, I feared they would never protect Claire from the same dismissals and coldness. The gathering, which was meant to be a celebration of family, became a stark reminder of my place in their world, invisible, undervalued, and on the outside looking in. As I lay in bed that night, the echoes of Mark's voice and my mother's patronizing tone replayed in my mind. I thought about how I had once hoped things would change, how I had clung to the belief that family meant unconditional love and support. But that night, wrapped in the quiet darkness of my room, I realized some wounds ran deeper than I wanted to admit, deep enough to threaten the fragile bonds I had tried so hard to hold together for Claire's sake. The reunion wasn't just a gathering. It was a mirror reflecting years of neglect and favoritism, a painful chapter in a story I was desperate to rewrite, for myself and for my daughter. And though I didn't yet know what the next step would be, I knew that things could not stay the same. The cracks had become too wide to ignore. The trip to Grandma's was supposed to be a simple, joyful occasion, a chance for Claire to spend time with her extended family while I stayed behind, caught up in work and obligations that I couldn't avoid. I arranged her train passage carefully, selecting seats near the conductor and making sure she had her backpack zipped tight, with her favorite books, a water bottle, and that worn teddy bear she'd slept with since she was a toddler. I called her before she left, reminding her to stay close to the other kids waiting on the platform and to call me if she felt unsure or scared. Claire's bright eyes met mine with a mix of excitement and a little nervousness, but mostly trust. I kissed her forehead, watched her board the train, and forced myself to let go, telling myself she'd be safe and loved at Grandma's house. Hours passed, and I worked through a busy day at the hospital, but something gnawed at me, the unsettling feeling that I hadn't heard from them. No photos, no updates, nothing that usually came flooding through our family group chat during gatherings. Then, my phone buzzed. I saw a message from the family group chat. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, expecting cheerful updates or at least some acknowledgement of Claire's arrival. Instead, the words froze me in place. "Come get her. We're departing now." It was Robert's message, blunt and lifeless, like a cold instruction rather than a plea or explanation. The chill spread through my chest, squeezing tightly. Before I could even process that, another message popped up from Elaine. Those words hit me harder than anything else. "Don't make us feel guilty. It's a lesson." The screen blurred as tears welled up in my eyes. I reread the messages, hoping against hope I'd misunderstood or that someone would clarify. But the coldness was unmistakable. Their calculated cruelty wasn't hidden behind euphemisms or excuses. It was laid bare in digital ink. I tried calling my father, but the phone went straight to voicemail. The same with my mother. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my keys, forgetting my coat in my haste, and bolted out the door. Jason looked up from the couch, eyes wide with concern, but said nothing as I whispered, "Claire's been left at the station." The drive to the train station was a blur of red lights, honking cars, and the pounding of my own heartbeat. The familiar roads twisted beneath the wheels, but my mind raced ahead, imagining Claire standing alone, scared and vulnerable, surrounded by strangers in a place meant to bring people together, not abandon them. When I arrived, the station was bustling with travelers, but Claire was nowhere in sight at first. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the crowd. Little faces, parents hustling past, suitcases rolling on the tiled floor. Then, near the ticket counters, I saw her. Claire stood on the edge of a group of waiting passengers, clutching her backpack tightly, eyes wide and shimmering with tears. Her small shoulders trembled with the cold, or maybe with fear. She looked so tiny and alone in the vastness of the station. As I rushed over, Claire caught sight of me and ran into my arms, sobbing quietly. "Mommy, they left me," she whispered, her voice breaking. I held her close, feeling the fragile weight of her little body against mine, my heart breaking into pieces for the innocence that had been so callously disregarded. Around us, a few onlookers glanced our way, some casting sympathetic looks, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Jason arrived moments later, his hand settling on my shoulder, grounding me as I fought back a wave of shock and fury. I wanted to scream at them, at my parents, at Mark, at anyone who could explain why they had done this to Claire. But all I could do was cradle my daughter, whispering promises to keep her safe, to never let anyone treat her like she was invisible or unimportant. That night, as we drove home in silence, Claire asleep against my shoulder, I felt the weight of betrayal settle deep within me. This wasn't just a terrible mistake. It was a deliberate act, a message from the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. The train station, once a place of arrivals and reunions, had become a symbol of abandonment. And as the city lights blurred past the car windows, I realized the fracture in my family wasn't just widening, it had shattered completely. That night, the heaviness of grief settled over me like a thick fog, but it didn't stay that way for long. It twisted and contorted inside my chest, transforming into a fierce, burning anger that I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel before. As I lay in bed, the room silent except for the faint hum of the city beyond the window, I could barely breathe. My mind replayed the image of Claire standing alone at the train station, her small frame trembling, clutching her backpack, the confusion and fear in her wide eyes as she searched for someone to come for her. It was a scene no parent should ever witness, yet there it was, etched deeply into my memory. For years, I had been the family's unpaid caregiver, the one who fixed problems no one else wanted to face. I was the emotional punching bag, absorbing blame, smoothing over conflicts, and giving without ever receiving the same in return. I had begged myself to believe that this was just how families worked, that sometimes love looked cold from the outside, but underneath, there was a bond strong enough to withstand it all. Now, I was forced to confront a harsher truth. Their lesson was not an accident, nor a misguided attempt at discipline. It was a deliberate act, a calculated cruelty aimed not just at me, but at the child I love more than anything in this world. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my discomfort and disappointment to maintain the fragile peace, the endless holidays I'd organized, the countless hours spent filling in the gaps left by my brother's absence, the money I quietly paid to keep the household running. All of it was met with indifference or worse, veiled resentment. My parents had normalized this imbalance, treating my sacrifices as obligations and my presence as something they could take for granted. I'd tried to explain it away, to convince myself that maybe this was their way of toughening me up. But now, that excuse felt hollow and inadequate. The words from the family group chat echoed relentlessly in my mind. "Come get her. We're departing now." So cold, so clinical, as if Claire were a forgotten package left to be retrieved at the last minute. And then my mother's voice, sharp and unyielding. "Don't make us feel guilty. It's a lesson." The cruelty was cloaked in the language of teaching and discipline, but it was nothing more than emotional abandonment disguised as wisdom. How could they call this a lesson? What kind of lesson leaves a child alone, vulnerable and scared? I felt the rage bubble up, fierce and unrelenting. It wasn't just anger at the act itself, but at the years of neglect that had paved the way for this moment. The way my parents and brother had dismissed me, overlooked me, and then turned their coldness toward Claire was a betrayal so profound it cut through every fiber of my being. They had sent a message that we were expendable, that our worth was conditional and tied to their approval, a currency they withheld freely. I remembered the countless moments I had buried my own pain to protect them, to keep Claire safe from the harsh realities I knew lurked beneath the surface. Now, those efforts felt like a fragile shield shattered by their thoughtlessness. I was furious that I had allowed myself to hope for change, to believe that family meant something more than obligation and manipulation. The illusion had been shattered, and with it, the last threads of my blind loyalty. Tears mingled with the anger, hot and bitter as I clenched my fists in the dark, willing myself not to break. I knew that this moment marked a turning point, a reckoning that was long overdue. The family's cruelty could no longer be disguised by polite smiles or whispered apologies. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I was done making excuses for their behavior. As the night deepened, I felt a quiet resolve begin to grow within me. I owed it to Claire, and to myself, to stand firm against this pattern of neglect and emotional abuse. No longer would I be the invisible caretaker or the scapegoat. No longer would I allow them to dictate the terms of our relationship through fear and guilt. This lesson they spoke of, I would learn it too, but on my own terms, with boundaries strong enough to protect the innocence that had been so callously disregarded. In the stillness of that night, grief and anger merged into something powerful, the seed of resistance, the first step toward reclaiming our dignity and demanding the respect we deserved. The journey ahead would be hard, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, not in them, but in myself. I switched to strategist mode. The flood of emotions, shock, grief, fury, had to be harnessed into something purposeful. For years, my family had leaned on me, not just emotionally, but financially and logistically, and now I realized how much power that had given me. They depended on me for so many things, paying bills that were never theirs to worry about, managing the endless caregiving tasks no one else wanted to touch, and orchestrating every family event as if it were my personal responsibility. But now, the balance was shifting. I wouldn't be their safety net anymore. That night, after Claire was safely home and asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows. My phone glowed with the cruel messages from the family chat, their cold, calculated words still echoing in my mind. "It's a lesson." I repeated that phrase silently, tasting the bitterness. I knew then this wasn't just some reckless mistake. It was intentional, a deliberate attempt to teach me, to punish me through Claire. The thought made my blood run cold, but it also steeled my resolve. I opened my laptop and began gathering evidence. Screenshots of the group chat messages were the starting point, but I dug deeper. I scrolled back through months of conversations, highlighting the patterns, the dismissive comments, the refusals to acknowledge my contributions, the subtle, toxic jokes at my expense. I compiled bank statements showing the financial support I had quietly provided over the years, utility bills, emergency car repairs, groceries for the household my parents and Mark still occupied. I made a list of every family event I had organized, from holiday dinners to birthday parties, and the time I'd spent coordinating, cleaning, driving, and smoothing over conflicts. Each item I recorded was like a brick in a wall I was building, not to trap them, but to protect myself and Claire. I wasn't sure yet how this evidence would be used, but I needed a way to hold them accountable, to make the invisible visible. My husband, Jason, sat beside me, offering quiet support. He didn't press me but understood the storm I was navigating. His presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. I also reached out to a lawyer I had consulted years ago about estate planning, something I'd put off, thinking the family would always be there. That loyalty was enough. Now I explained what had happened, and she listened with the kind of calm professionalism that made me feel grounded. We discussed altering my will to exclude my parents and brother, ensuring Claire's interests were secured no matter what. I couldn't risk the people who had so easily abandoned her having any control over her future. I asked about legal protections for Claire, too. Guardianship, access to medical records, and rights in case my family tried to interfere. It was painful to consider, but necessary. This was no longer just about feelings. It was about safeguarding the life and well-being of my daughter. At the same time, I began quietly changing passwords to online accounts shared with family members, utilities, bank accounts, and even the family group chat itself. I updated paperwork on insurance and financial assets, ensuring that any future support I provided wouldn't be easily redirected or exploited. These actions felt clinical, almost cold, but they were my armor against the chaos. Despite all this upheaval inside me, I maintained a calm exterior when interacting with my family. I didn't send angry messages or confrontations. Instead, I replied with brief, neutral responses, or sometimes didn't reply at all. To them, it looked like I was simply stressed, maybe pulling back a little, but they couldn't see the depth of planning and boundary setting taking place beneath the surface. This strategy was vital. I had to keep my footing clear and steady. Any sign of weakness or overt anger would give them ammunition to dismiss me as unstable or overreacting. I needed to be measured, deliberate, and unshakable. In quiet moments, I thought of Claire, her wide eyes full of trust despite everything. Protecting her became my North Star, guiding every decision. She deserved better than the cold lessons they dished out. She deserved a mother who would fight fiercely, who would draw lines they couldn't cross. That night, as the house fell silent and the city lights dimmed behind closed curtains, I felt the first real shift inside me. I was no longer just the caregiver, the peacemaker, or the invisible daughter. I was a strategist, a protector, a woman laying the groundwork to reclaim our dignity and demand respect, on my terms. This was just the beginning. The days that followed felt like walking through a dense fog, each step deliberate but cautious. I began pulling back, not with a dramatic announcement or confrontation, but with quiet, calculated distance. The phone, which had once been a tether to the family's constant demands and manipulations, became a device I handled on my own terms. When calls came in, I let the ringtones ring longer than usual, sometimes for minutes, before answering, my voice neutral, clipped. It wasn't cruelty or spite. It was the careful establishment of a boundary I'd never set before. A message might go unanswered for hours or days, with no explanation, no apology, just silence that hung like a subtle but unmistakable line drawn in the sand. Financial aid, which had flowed quietly from my account to cover everything from overdue bills to Mark's forgotten expenses, began tapering off. I stopped automatic transfers 1 month at a time, shrinking the invisible safety net I'd woven around their lives. No more last-minute bailouts. No more covering for forgotten utility payments or surprise car repairs. I knew their bills would pile up, and Mark would scramble, but this time I wouldn't be the one to clean up the mess. It was a small rebellion that felt enormous. The quiet sting of their disbelief or denial when payments stopped was a confirmation I was finally disrupting the imbalance. Invitations to family dinners, weekend get-togethers, and holiday plans that once felt like obligations now became things I declined, often without explanation. No polite excuses, no fabricated work conflicts, just a simple, "I can't make it," or worse, no response at all. I watched as their confusion turned to frustration, their attempts to coax me back met with gentle but firm refusals. I kept my tone even and my reasons vague. The message was clear. I was no longer available at their convenience. Behind the scenes, I took steps to safeguard Claire and myself in ways I hadn't dared before. Passwords to shared family accounts were quietly changed. Utilities, streaming services, even the family group chat where so much of the cruelty had played out. It was a small but significant act of reclaiming control over spaces they'd previously accessed without question. Paperwork on financial assets and insurance was updated, ensuring that any future support or inheritance would be protected from interference. In my mind, I was building a fortress, brick by brick, to shield my daughter from further harm. Despite all this, I wore a mask of calm when interacting with the family. On video calls, my smile was polite but distant, my words measured. At gatherings, when I did attend, I kept conversations light and avoided topics that might ignite the underlying tension. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel or lose control. To them, I was merely stressed, perhaps overwhelmed, but still the reliable daughter, just one who needed a little space. Little did they know, beneath that composed surface, a quiet storm was gathering. Sometimes I caught the flicker of suspicion or frustration in my parents' eyes, the way my brother's smile faltered for a moment when I declined another invitation. Yet no one dared to confront me directly about the changes. The family group chat grew quieter in my absence, the usual stream of jokes and updates replaced by awkward silences and unanswered questions. It was as if they sensed the shifting tides but lacked the tools or willingness to stop it. At night, when the house was still and Claire's soft breathing filled her bedroom, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I was doing. It wasn't just withdrawal. It was a redefinition of my relationship with the family, a recalibration of what I would accept and what I would no longer tolerate. The sacrifices I'd made for years had come at too high a cost, and the train station incident had been the final, undeniable proof that my kindness had been mistaken for weakness. Jason remained my anchor through it all, his quiet support a balm on my weary soul. He never pushed or questioned, understanding that this process was mine to navigate. We talked late into the night about the future, about how to protect Claire, how to build a life where family didn't mean pain, and how to stand firm in the face of their coldness without losing myself. This wasn't easy. Old patterns tugged at me relentlessly, the urge to explain, to apologize, to mend what felt broken. But I resisted, reminding myself that progress required distance and clarity. My daughter's safety and my own peace depended on it. And so, day by day, I withdrew, not with fanfare or fury, but with quiet resilience. It was the slow unspooling of my presence from a family that had taken too much for granted, the first steps toward reclaiming control over my life and protecting Claire's innocence from the cruelty hidden behind familiar faces. The lines were being drawn, the boundaries set, not just to punish, but to preserve. The family might not understand now, but they would soon feel the impact of a daughter and mother no longer willing to be invisible. The moment finally arrived, the one I had been steeling myself for in the quiet hours of sleepless nights. I sat at the kitchen table, Claire asleep upstairs, Jason's steady breathing filling the room beside me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I typed out the message that would irrevocably shift the course of our family story. To Robert, Elaine, and Mark. Effective immediately, I am ending all financial support to you. Additionally, I have updated my will to exclude all three of you. Claire and I will no longer participate in family events or communications until genuine respect and accountability are demonstrated. I paused, the weight of those words pressing against my chest like a physical force. This wasn't a decision made lightly or out of spite. It was the culmination of years of neglect, disregard, and the cruel abandonment of my daughter at the train station. I knew that once this message was sent, there would be no going back to the tentative peace we'd maintained, fragile and false as it was. After clicking send, I exhaled deeply, the air leaving my lungs carrying away the last vestiges of my hesitation. This was my line in the sand. For too long, I had been the family's invisible safety net, paying bills they ignored, smoothing over their conflicts, and absorbing their dismissive looks and words. But now, I was done. 2 days later, a family meeting was arranged, at my insistence. It wasn't a gathering born of warmth or reconciliation. It was a necessary confrontation. We met in the modest conference room of a community center, neutral ground where no one held home advantage. I arrived early, clutching my folder of evidence, the screenshots of the group chat messages, bank statements documenting years of financial support, and detailed notes of past neglect and emotional abuse. As the door creaked open, my parents and Mark entered, their faces a mixture of surprise, indignation, and, beneath it all, something I couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps. They took their seats, arranging themselves as if we were about to engage in polite conversation, but the charged atmosphere was impossible to ignore. I began calmly, my voice steady despite the storm swirling inside me. I want to lay everything out clearly. For years, I have carried the burden of this family's financial and emotional responsibilities alone. I have covered bills, planned events, and cared for Claire and my aging grandparents without acknowledgement or support. And yet, the incident at the train station, leaving Claire behind with no explanation, was the final straw. I clicked through the slides on my laptop, each screen displaying a timeline of messages. The chilling text from Dad, "Come get her. We're departing now," followed by Mom's cold addition, "Don't make us feel guilty. It's a lesson." I let the silence that followed those words fill the room. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his usual confident smirk replaced by something taut and defensive. Elaine's eyes flashed briefly, but her face remained a mask of controlled calm. Robert's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue, but he said nothing. I pressed on. I have documented every instance of neglect, every dismissal, every time my contributions were ignored or minimized. This family dynamic has been toxic, and it ends here. Claire will not be subjected to this treatment anymore. I am withdrawing her from all family activities indefinitely. Their silence was deafening. The room felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of my declaration. I could see the panic flicker in Robert's eyes and the subtle shift in Mark's posture, the unmasking of control that had always seemed so effortless for them. I expect respect, I continued, accountability for the harm done, and a willingness to change. Until then, we will live our lives free from the shadows of your neglect. Elaine finally spoke, her voice low and measured but carrying an unmistakable edge. Penny, you're overreacting. Families have conflicts. This is just a phase. You're punishing us for something that could have been a misunderstanding. I shook my head gently. It's not a phase. It's a pattern. And I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting my daughter and myself. I've tried to make peace for years. Now I'm making boundaries. The meeting ended without resolution. No apologies, no promises. Just a tense quiet as they gathered their things and left, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed in the stillness. As I sat back, the enormity of what I had done began to sink in. The family I had known, the one I had tried to hold together, was fracturing visibly now. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a fierce clarity. I had reclaimed control. I had said no to being invisible. I had made a choice to protect Claire from the cold lessons of cruelty. This was not the end of the story. It was the moment the next chapter began, one where respect and love would have to be earned, not demanded by blood alone. The aftermath hit the Howard family like a sudden storm ripping through fragile branches. Almost overnight, the intricate web of dependencies I had quietly maintained began to unravel, and the consequences rippled out faster than I ever imagined. Bills went unpaid, social invitations I had once accepted without hesitation were declined, and the tightly controlled narrative that Mark had so carefully cultivated started to crumble, revealing cracks in his flawless facade. I could almost feel the tension radiating through the thin walls of our family's communications. Phone calls flooded in, some desperate, some angry, and some laced with feigned remorse. Robert and Elaine became relentless, their voices a constant presence in my life, as they pleaded, cajoled, and sometimes accused me in the same breath. "Penny, you're being too harsh," my father would say, his tone a mix of frustration and vulnerability. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." But I heard past the words, sensing the panic under their carefully measured pleas. The control they'd always wielded was slipping, and it terrified them. Elaine's calls were colder, more calculated. "You're punishing us for making a tough decision, for teaching Claire a lesson she needs," she said one evening, her voice tight and brittle. "You don't understand family dynamics the way we do." There was no warmth there, only a chilling defensiveness that underscored how deeply entrenched their cruelty was. I refused to engage in those calls beyond acknowledging their words with calm, firm boundaries. I had nothing left to argue or explain. Mark, whose golden child image had long shielded him from scrutiny, began to falter visibly. The polished smile he wore in public waned during family gatherings and even in private conversations. I noticed it in the way his voice lost its usual confident edge, the way his eyes darted anxiously when our discussions turned to finances or Claire's well-being. For the first time, the effortless charm that had masked his irresponsibility was cracking, revealing a man struggling to maintain control over a rapidly shifting family landscape. Meanwhile, the social invitations that once marked the rhythm of our family life, birthday parties, weekend barbecues, holiday dinners, became conspicuously absent from my calendar. Messages went unanswered or were met with vague excuses. It was clear they were trying to isolate me, to push me out of the picture where I had quietly held so much power. But with every invitation declined and every gathering I skipped, I felt a small measure of relief, a growing distance that was, in itself, a form of protection. I wasn't sure yet what the long-term outcome would be, but the immediate discomfort was a sign that change was unfolding. Their attempts to reach Claire were more subtle, but no less manipulative. There was a cousin who texted her directly, asking to meet for ice cream or to come over and play. At first, I was wary. What were their intentions? Were they trying to soften her? To pry their way back in through her? I told Claire firmly that she was only to accept invitations from people who respected her and me equally. It was a delicate balance, protecting her innocence while shielding her from the emotional games that had defined too much of our family life. Friends and extended relatives began to notice the shift too. Whispers started circulating, questions asked with furrowed brows and concerned glances. "Is everything okay with the Howards?" a neighbor asked Jason once, her voice low and hesitant. We shared a look, and I nodded slowly, knowing that the cracks in our family facade were becoming visible beyond our immediate circle. The carefully maintained image of a close-knit, loving family was fracturing in a way that could no longer be hidden. Behind the scenes, I was documenting everything: calls, messages, visits, building a quiet record for myself and for Claire's protection. It felt painfully necessary, a shield against the unpredictable tides of emotion and manipulation that had characterized our family interactions for so long. I was no longer willing to be the silent victim, the invisible caretaker who bore the burdens without recognition or support. Some days, the emotional weight was almost overwhelming. The phone would ring again, and I'd steel myself for another round of guilt-tripping or hollow apologies. I learned to let the calls go to voicemail, returning only when I felt strong enough to maintain my composure. When Robert's voice cracked with desperation or Elaine's tone sharpened with accusation, I reminded myself that this was the storm before the calm, the inevitable reckoning that comes with setting boundaries in a family ruled by expectation and entitlement. Jason remained my anchor, his quiet presence a constant reminder that I was not alone. When I faltered, he caught me. When the tears came, he held me. Together, we talked through the pain and anger, weaving plans for a future where Claire could grow without the shadows of neglect and cruelty. His support gave me the strength to keep standing firm, even as the family's resistance grew more desperate and more bruising. Yet, even as the Howards scrambled to adjust, to face the chaos unleashed by my withdrawal, the tension simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over again. The battle lines had been drawn, and while I held the high ground, I knew this was far from over. Each unanswered bill, each declined invitation, and every fractured smile was a reminder that our family's story was entering a new, uncertain chapter, one where the cost of past neglect was now coming due. The ripples of my decision spread through the Howard family like a storm, tearing apart a fragile house of cards. Almost immediately, the delicate balance they'd long relied on, my quiet financial and emotional support, began to crumble. Bills that used to be paid promptly suddenly went unanswered. The utilities, the mortgage, car payments, those silent transactions I had covered for years, unseen but essential, began to fall behind. The property that had been in the family for decades, a modest but cherished house in the neighborhood, was put on the market. The strain of mounting expenses, coupled with their faltering business ventures that I had once helped manage behind the scenes, left no choice but to sell. I could almost see the panic setting in behind their carefully constructed facades. Mark, once so effortlessly charming and confident, started to lose his composure. At family gatherings, his usual bright smile faltered, and his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. He no longer dominated conversations with ease. Instead, he avoided topics about money or plans, shifting uncomfortably when I brought up the changes. The golden child, so long the center of attention, was no longer untouchable. Socially, the Howards began to unravel as well. The whispers started quietly at first. Soft questions from extended relatives, neighbors, even acquaintances who had always seen the Howards as a close-knit, affluent family. "Is everything all right over there?" Or, "I heard things aren't so smooth with Penny and her parents." Those murmurs grew louder, a creeping spread of doubt and gossip that unsettled the image my family had meticulously cultivated for years. Invitations to social events that once flowed freely into my phone dwindled, and then stopped altogether. It was a deliberate isolation tactic, but also a reflection of their growing discomfort as their private dysfunction bled into public view. Meanwhile, their tactics evolved. Robert's voice, once calm and commanding, now wavered between desperation and anger when he called. Elaine's messages became sharper, laced with thinly veiled threats disguised as concern. "You're tearing this family apart," she accused in one voicemail, her tone brittle but fierce. "You think you can just walk away and everything will be fine? Think again." But I remained unmoved. I had learned to steel myself, to respond only with measured words or not at all. Their guilt trips and accusations bounced off the fortress of boundaries I was building. One of the more insidious moves was their attempt to reach Claire directly. It started with casual texts from cousins, invitations to play dates and ice cream outings. I was cautious. I sat with Claire and explained gently that she could only accept invitations from family members who respected both her and me. It was heartbreaking to see her confused by the sudden coldness and distance from relatives she had once adored. The emotional manipulation was subtle, but persistent, and I knew I had to protect her from being used as a pawn in their attempts to regain control. As these family fractures widened, I found unexpected allies in friends and extended relatives. People began to ask questions, their concern tinged with disbelief. I remember a neighbor approaching Jason quietly at a community event, lowering her voice to ask if things were really as bad as rumors suggested. We exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken truths. The carefully maintained veneer of the Howards as a perfect family was cracking, exposing the rawness beneath. Throughout this turmoil, I documented everything: calls, texts, visits, and overheard conversations. Each interaction became a piece of the larger puzzle I was assembling to protect Claire and myself. This record was my shield, a testament to the reality I faced against the backdrop of denial and manipulation. It was exhausting, sometimes overwhelming, but necessary. I was no longer willing to be the silent victim or the invisible caretaker whose sacrifices went unrecognized and unrewarded. There were dark days when the emotional weight pressed down so heavily I could barely breathe. The relentless phone calls, the guilt-laden voices, the veiled accusations, they all threatened to break through my resolve. Yet, every time I faltered, Jason was there. His steady presence grounded me. In late-night conversations, we planned a future that didn't involve bending to the whims of a family unwilling to change. Together, we forged a vision of peace and dignity for Claire, far removed from the cold lessons and empty promises of the past. Still, the Howards did not simply retreat quietly. The tensions simmered, a volatile undercurrent that threatened to boil over anew with each unanswered bill, each declined invitation, each fractured smile. I stood firm, knowing this was only the beginning of a long road. The cost of years of neglect was now coming due, and while I held the high ground, I knew the fight to reclaim our lives and our dignity had only just begun. The aftermath of that fateful confrontation settled over our lives like a dense fog that wouldn't lift. The Howard family, once a web of unspoken expectations and silent compromises, now faced a reckoning they couldn't avoid. I had drawn a line, not just in the sand, but in the foundation of everything we had called family. This fracture wasn't just about Claire or me. It was about the soul of what it meant to be connected by blood, but betrayed by cruelty. I held my ground firmly, knowing that the family now stood at a crossroads. They could choose to acknowledge the pain they had inflicted, confront their own roles in this toxic dynamic, and begin the long, difficult work of healing. Or they could continue down their path of denial and manipulation, severing ties permanently. My role had shifted from silent caretaker to vigilant protector. I set the terms clearly. Respect, equal treatment, and genuine accountability were not just wishes. They were non-negotiable prerequisites for any kind of relationship moving forward. Respect meant more than polite words or surface-level civility. It meant listening without dismissing, showing empathy without judgment, and honoring Claire's and my dignity at every turn. It meant no more cold messages that treated a child like an inconvenience or a bargaining chip. Equal treatment was about dismantling the long-standing hierarchy that placed Mark on a pedestal while relegating me, and by extension Claire, to the margins. It was about ending the favoritism that had warped our family interactions for years, restoring fairness and recognition where there had been none. Accountability was perhaps the hardest demand of all. It was a call for my parents and brother to face the truth of their actions, the dismissals, the exclusions, and that cruel day at the train station, to take ownership of the harm perpetrated, to apologize sincerely, and to commit to change in both word and deed. Without this, no amount of forced gatherings or empty promises could bridge the growing chasm between us. I made it clear that until these conditions were met, Claire and I would remain distant, not out of malice, but out of necessity. This wasn't a punishment. It was protection. The wounds inflicted on my daughter, on that day and in so many subtle ways before, required space to begin healing, free from the recurring cycles of neglect and emotional abuse. This decision reshaped our daily lives profoundly. Gone were the endless phone calls demanding favors or emotional labor. Instead, I curated the relationships we maintained with care, surrounding Claire and myself with people who uplifted rather than drained us. Jason's unwavering support became our anchor, his quiet strength a balm to the wounds the Howards refused to acknowledge. Together, we built a sanctuary, a home filled with laughter, understanding, and the kind of unconditional love I had always longed for from my own family. Friends and chosen family stepped in too. They saw the exhaustion behind my composed exterior and offered spaces where we could breathe freely, where Claire's joy wasn't compromised by family drama. These connections reminded me that family isn't just who you're born to. It's who chooses to stand by you through the darkest storms. Yet, the Howard family remained caught between two options. Some members wavered, their silence speaking volumes. A few reached out tentatively, attempting to bridge the gulf with hesitant apologies or guarded conversations. But many doubled down, clinging to old narratives and deflecting blame. The fractures deepened, and the public whispers grew louder, making it harder for the family's image to mask the truth inside. I saw this unfolding not with triumph, but with a somber understanding. Change is never easy, especially when it demands confronting uncomfortable truths and dismantling long-held illusions. The Howards were at a painful impasse: grow and rebuild, or remain fractured and isolated. For me, the path forward was clear. I would no longer sacrifice my daughter's well-being or my own peace for a family that refused to respect us. Protecting Claire's innocence and nurturing her sense of worth became my mission. Every small victory, a genuine smile, a bedtime story without worry, a weekend free from tension, was a testament to the life we were reclaiming. The lessons my parents tried to teach through cruelty had backfired. Instead of breaking us, those cold blows forged a resolve that no one in that family could ignore. Respect isn't demanded by blood. It's earned through kindness, empathy, and accountability. And as I watched Claire's eyes light up with the simple joys of a childhood free from fear, I knew we were beginning something new. A chapter not written by them, but by us. The Howard family now faced a choice: to meet us there or to watch from the sidelines as we built a life defined not by pain, but by love and resilience.